So after a 4-hour train ride, I got off at Finse, ready for a longer trek this time. The weather forecast was pretty bad, so I kept a good pace. I wanted to get to the cabin before it got dark. It was still quite a bit of snow in this area, and most of the snow is from last year. I saw no other hikers on this first day, and since I was doing 7 days, I had decided to bring a light backpack this time. I'm carrying a little bit more than 8 kilos, and we got down to 6 kilos in the end, so we're talking 15-20 pounds. Staying in cabins. I got to the cabin a little after 7 o'clock, and there were 2 old men there already. Fireplace was going, and I got my own room, so it was all good. The next morning I had breakfast with the guys. Then I went outside to get some more water for the cabin. I packed up my stuff and I was ready to go. The weather forecast was not in my favor today either. They were predicting winds of up to 17 meters per second, which is not pleasant at all when you're hiking at high altitude. Here you see me trekking on the snow. The trail will go through a lot of rocky areas, which is not good to hike on. And you see a lot of snow coming down here. There was quite a bit of precipitation this day. Snow and rain. I got quite wet. You won't really see it when you're watching these videos because I don't do a lot of filming when it's raining, but yeah, this was probably the worst day of them all. I got wet and cold and ready to get to the cabin basically. Here I have a little break before I head on. I tried to check my 4G as often as possible because Norway were playing Northern Ireland in soccer. We ended up winning that game 5-1, so that was pretty cool. When I finally got to the cabin, I saw a sign saying that there were wolverines in the area. Nobody at the cabin at all. Here you can see the storage area where they store food, so you can basically buy what you want and cook it, and it's an honor system where you leave your details so you can pay. Drying my clothing there before I'm eating my second dinner, and then it's bedtime. The cabins I'm staying in, they belong to an organization called DNT. These are self-service cabins where you have food stored up so you can cook it and prepare it and enjoy it. They also have something called no service, where there's no food. The huts are usually smaller, but those are nice too. And the last option is the full service, and I stayed at a couple of those later on in the trek. So this was the longest day of them all. The weather was a bit all over the place with sun and rain and snow, and here you see a rainbow as well. I did run into one hiker, so I talked a little bit to him. Except for that, the hike was long and quiet. I was listening to a podcast most of the day. Then I ran into these guys, reindeer, some more than 100 of them, so they roam around freely in this area. Not bad. Then you have the trail, which crossed this river, and 15 minutes later it had been crossed the river again. But oh well. The wind was strong, so I covered up my face so it wouldn't get too cold here. Later on I got up higher and it was a bit foggy. Not much visibility there, but now I'm approaching cabin finally after more than 10 hours. There was nobody at the cabin this time either, and it was quite pleasant. I mean, the first thing you do is basically get the fire going, then you cook your meal. After that you gotta enjoy your meal. I had some tea with every meal, and waited another hour, and then I cooked again. Pancakes, call it dessert or dinner. Then you enjoy the fireplace in the evening and you settle down and fall asleep. The next day I woke up to fresh snow on the ground. I walked outside and it was a true winter wonderland. It turned out to be a beautiful day. It didn't rain at all, but it was quite cold, as you can probably tell. When it's cold, you're better off keeping your gloves on. But it's inconvenient to be fiddling with the camera and zippers and backpacks and so on with gloves on, so you have two options: get used to it or get cold fingers. And that's pretty much where I was at most of the time. This was quite a contrast to Oslo, where there was 20 Celsius and sunshine around these days. I didn't see any hikers today either. I did run into a couple of hunters, and I did spot a couple of eagles and some grouse as well. After 3 long days, I had been looking forward to this day. This was my rest day, as I like to call it. Well, I didn't rest much. I hiked for more than 6 hours, but compared to the previous days, it was quite a relief to be able to arrive at the cabin quite early and relax for the rest of the evening. And the weather was good, so I enjoyed this day quite a bit. Right here you can see that I'm approaching the cabin, and I was alone at this cabin as well. This cabin wasn't all that good. It was around 0 Celsius when I got there, so had to get the fire going quite fast, and I managed to heat it up well, but yeah, I preferred the other cabins, I'd say. So I listened to a podcast for most of the evening, and then I went to bed basically, and I had a good night here as well. It's a beautiful area. I had my alarm on and got up early the next morning. It was not light outside when I got up, but by the time I was heading out there, it was bright and nice. The reason for me getting up this early was that the weather was going to get worse throughout the day. So I wanted to get as far as possible before it started pouring down. And I got snowed on, it rained. Here I'm passing into a marshy area. It was quite wet on the ground this day too. And I did a long distance today too. And I went quite fast. The highlight of this day was definitely 5 minutes after this shot was taken, when I managed to fall into the river. Yeah, that was impressive. Here you see me laughing at myself. I saw some grouse this day, and the temperature was actually alright. Nice colors here too, fall time. And I got to this full service cabin where I was staying in a dorm. Room for a lot of people, but just a few people stayed here, so that worked out fine for me. I decided to eat breakfast at the cabin. A lot of people there, as you can tell. That's usually the case with these full-service cabins, but the food was excellent and the staff was good too, so it was enjoyable. A lot of people in this area. You have road access, so that explains it. Now the lake you see here is called Besseggen. It's quite famous, so this stretch is very popular, and it was probably the best so far on my trek. The weather was quite interesting today. At times it was calm, then it got really windy. At times there was no precipitation, then it was pouring down on me. Later on it was snowing on me, and I even got some hail, and then sunshine as well. Up in the high mountains, it's very unpredictable and you never know what you get, but that's part of the package. It was a beautiful day, probably the best one of the trek so far, so I really enjoyed it. Here you see me approaching the Lake Gjende, which is another famous one with boat traffic, and it pours down again. I did a lot of filming this day, and you'll see these shots are quite beautiful. Right now I've past the hut Gjendebu and I'm approaching Bukkelægret. I'm in the middle of it right there. It's an area with chains and it's quite steep, so it's a famous stretch. I'll let you enjoy the last part of this day without me talking. I finally got some great weather for the last day of the trek, and this was going to be the highlight of the whole week. Today I was doing the famous Besseggen. This is a very popular hike, so it's normally crowded with a lot of people. I saw nobody today. Just me, the snow, the sunshine, and the beautiful mountains of Jotunheimen National Park. No people. How do you explain that? Well, basically, Memurubu, where I stayed, was closing, so there were nobody hiking in the opposite direction. And I started early, so nobody caught up with me either. Ahead of me here you see the famous ridge Besseggen, which is probably the most famous ridge hike in Norway, which is next to Besseggen at the Best Lake that I'm next to right now. It was very windy, so I had to anchor down my tripod with rocks, and I had to hold on at times as well. So my week of trekking was getting to an end. It had been a great week, but I was quite tired in the end.